Give some serious thought to what you want to do, but don't get so bogged down in the thinking that you never get around to the doing. Hello and welcome to part 2 of How to Fix a Church. Not at all arrogant of a title. But if you caught my first video, you know that I talked about the importance of encouraging our priests, bishops, and assorted clerics to be better at their jobs. And in the process, I laid out some of the thinking of Archbishop Sheen along those same lines, and also constructed a model of this three-legged stool of how we do that, with one leg being we've got to work on our personal holiness, one leg being, of course, we have to clean up the corruption that's all too evident, and one leg being the encouragement that I just mentioned. And in that video, I suggested that we'd have a follow-up video getting into details about how to do the encouraging. Guess it's about time that I put that out, isn't it? By the way, I apologize for the delay in getting this one out, and I'm not trying to make any excuses. I make a distinction between excuses and explanations. Explanations is I messed up and here's why. Excuses is I didn't really mess up because I had a good enough reason for it. No, I messed up. This should have come sooner, but a little bit of explanation might help illuminate something that some of you struggle with as well, and maybe help you come up with a way to bypass that. What I'm talking about is the fact that for some of us, there's a real tendency to overthink things, overanalyze things, make the simple way too complicated, and then never get around to doing it. That's probably one of the biggest suggestions you'll hear today is don't do that, don't overthink it, just jump in and do things. With that being said, let's get into it a bit more. How do we encourage our clerics to be better clerics? And I definitely want to get into some specifics of that. But believe it or not, I want to talk a little bit more about the whys we do it before we get into the how we do it. I'm also going to wrap up today with a request for you guys to really start talking to each other and talk to me down in the comments and that kind of stuff. I want us all working at this together. I don't want this to be a one-man show. I'm hoping to, honestly, to encourage a little bit of a movement of people trying to encourage their clerics. With that being said, preview a little bit more as to the why. One of the comments I got regarding the first video was ironically by somebody who in their comment mentioned, by the way, I haven't watched the video yet, but how to fix a church? Get the priest to grow a spine and teach the truth like they ought to. And the guy was absolutely right. Let's be real. But there's a few problems with that answer. One is we don't control that. We're the laity. Unless you know how to do a spine, injection, good luck. More to the point, I don't disagree with that comment at all. We need our priests and bishops to be better priests and bishops, but the question is, since we can't step into their shoes, since we can't do it for them, and who's to guarantee that we won't do a worse job than they're doing, how can we encourage them to do it better? And why would they even need it? The bottom line that you've got to keep in mind is even though they have the graces of ordination, the gifts of the Holy Spirit in ways that we don't fully share from not having been ordained, they're still weak, sometimes lonely, often sinful people, just like you and me. And the weight of life can crush them, just like you and me. And I can already almost hear in my head some of you kind of objecting or protesting, but they're priests, they're bishops, they have ordination, they have the grace of holy orders, they act in persona Christi. They shouldn't need us. Maybe they shouldn't need us. but they certainly want us. Think of that phrase in persona Christi. They are the representatives of Christ here on earth. Does Christ need your support? Of course not. Jesus Christ is fully God. He is all-powerful, self-sufficient, and doesn't need us in the least. Oh, but he wants us. Especially in his human nature when he was here among us, how he wanted us. In the Garden of Olives, before the Passion, he felt abandoned and lamented. Couldn't you stay up just 1 hour with me? While he was there, he was in such agony that angels were sent to comfort him. And of course, in his almighty power, he could have set things such that it was unnecessary. He could, and yet, I'm sure he welcomed the comforting as he was sweating blood. A little later, on the way to Golgotha, he fell under the weight of the cross repeatedly, as his human nature had grown weak and weary, and he was given Simon the Cyrenian to help him carry the cross. Now again, did he need that? No, not really. He was God. At any moment, he could have, simply by an act of the will, restored all of his strength, restored all of his glory, and been stronger than any one of us. But he appreciated it, and he wanted it. So again, the priests and the bishops may act in persona Christi, but they're not God. They're frail human beings just like the rest of us, and they respond to human instincts just like the rest of us. They like to be noticed. They like to be respected and appreciated. They want to know that what they're doing matters. Again, should they be able to proceed without that? Yeah, possibly. But is it reasonable to expect that they will proceed without that indefinitely? Imagine you being in their spot. Imagine that the only voices that you hear are the voices of the culture and the protesters and those who want you to go against the faith and undermine the faith. Imagine you're never hearing the support from those who want to support the faith. And imagine how that would affect you. If you can imagine that, next ask yourself, why would they be any different? And even if they're strong enough that against all the pressures of the culture, all the pressures of the, I'm losing a word here, but basically those who reject the faith, even if you're strong enough not to succumb to that, not to fall into it, not to go to the dark side and start preaching and doing evil, they might just grow tired and lazy and disheartened by being so woefully ignored and unappreciated. And they might fall into sins of omission, not commission. Yeah, they don't preach anything evil. They don't do anything evil. They don't encourage evil. But they kind of start dragging their heels and not being so energetic about fighting the culture anymore. And we can't afford that if we're going to fix the church. We can't afford that if, more importantly, we want to get to heaven. But again, imagine being in their position. How hard it must be to continue under that kind of pressure. Now let me give you another, more practical or pragmatic reason for supporting them. Let's say that with what I just talked about there, I didn't touch your heart. Hey, they just need to tough it up and do their job. Okay, fine. Let's stipulate to that one for a minute. Think about effectiveness. Think about force multipliers. If you're trying to lead others to heaven, if you're trying to do what you can to get people stronger and more faithful and all that. If you're taking your little soapbox, your literal soapbox to the street corner and doing your preaching to kind of turn people around, how many people are you going to reach? If you're lucky, a couple, maybe even a dozen. But you influence one basically good priest who's getting weak and weary and tired to buck up and do better. Then you're not affecting dozens, but maybe hundreds or dozens of hundreds. You're being much more effective. Mother Teresa once said something to the effect of, God doesn't call us to be successful, he calls us to be faithful. I agree with that sentiment. But it doesn't say that we have to purposely be unsuccessful. If you can think of a more effective way to do something, why wouldn't you? And if you can affect the priests, you'll be more effective than just doing your little thing often wherever you are, that kind of stuff. So with some of the whys out of the way, let's talk a little bit more specifically about the how. Start with and don't overlook the obvious. Walk up, shake their hands, say hi. Treat them, recognize them as a fellow human being. Get to know them, visit with them. Now, how do you do that? Again, don't overthink it. The same as you would do with any other human being. Talk, visit, try to find common ground, that kind of stuff. Now, I want to make an aside here. Some of us are introverts and some of us struggle with that kind of thing. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person if you struggle with that kind of thing, but it does mean that if you recognize that, it's important to know that you will need to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. You'll need to think of ways to make the approach, but beware of overthinking things to the point of preventing yourself from doing anything. If the best you can do is just shake the priest's hand on the way out of church, hey, that's cool. Start there. And then keep practicing and maybe you'll get better at it, or maybe later you'll get up to giving them your name or complimenting them or spending a few minutes visiting or inviting them to coffee or inviting them to your home or that kind of good stuff. But again, I can appreciate the discomfort level. There's some of us that's just not our natural instinct. There's others of us, God bless them. I know people that they've never met a stranger and they could talk to a fence post if they had to. And they could probably talk well enough that next thing you know, the fence post is talking back to them. But if that's not you, recognize that's not you. Push past it because this is more important. So again, introduce, shake hands, hi. Introduce yourself. Hi, my name's Pete, that kind of stuff. A little bit of contact and that kind of stuff. Next step, work on complimenting them. I want to spend a little bit extra time on the concept of complimenting them. And just like I said before, I don't want you to overthink this. If the best you can do is, hi, Father Smith, great Mass, cool. Or, hi, Father Smith, I love that you're our priest. Cool. Boom. That being said, let me give you a couple of specific pointers and hints on how to be a bit more effective, how to have more impact when paying compliments that might change people's behavior. And if you'll play along with me a little bit, I want to illustrate this point by paying you a couple of compliments real quick. First one, compliment number one. Dear viewer, thank you for viewing my video, and boy, are you looking good today. Now, even though you know I couldn't see you and you have no idea what you look like, that probably felt a little bit good. But let's go for another try. Compliment number two. Dear viewer, thank you for tuning in. I'm sure you listened to the first video and now you're listening to the second one, and we're well about 10 minutes in, which was longer than the last one, and you're still paying attention. That means something to me. It means that you care about making a difference and that you're willing to put in the effort to try and see if you can figure out how to help make that difference. That's important, and I appreciate it. And thank you. Now, if you're anything like most of the human race, that second compliment was a lot more powerful and it affected you deeper, even though, again, I don't know you from Adam. You're on the other side of a computer screen. I've never seen you. What was different, though? As best as I could, I was complimenting you on something you were doing, not just who you are. That's powerful. Complimenting people on their appearance or who they are, it's nothing per se wrong with that. But noticing what they're doing and complimenting them on what they're doing, now that's powerful. Along those lines, let me give you two real-world examples of those kinds of compliments. The first one comes from one of those fence post talking friends. I could do a long version of this, but I can see that this video is already dragging on for a bit, so I'll try to do this a bit briefly. But bottom line, she had gone to a parish that we were not familiar with for a particular function. She had noticed that they were rehabilitating, reconstructing, renovating the church building. Noticed that it was looking good, and she had, as is her nature, struck up a conversation with some of the local parishioners and heard from them that the priest was doing the renovation slowly because he didn't want to put the parish into debt. And that really struck her. It's one thing to have an eye for renovations and that kind of stuff. It's another thing to take care of your parishioners enough to pace the renovations such that they don't go into debt. And boy, did she latch onto that and incorporated it into her compliment to the pastor, which again, we're going to call him Father Smith. I don't want to use specifics and get anybody either embarrassed or in trouble and that kind of stuff. But basically, she walked up to Father Smith and she said, Father Smith, I love the renovations that you're doing to this church in this parish. It looks so beautiful. But by the way, I heard from your parishioners about how you're doing it and the way you're pacing it so that you don't put them into debt. And I really love that. That is so thoughtful. That is so well considered. That is so wise, and that's shepherding and taking care of your parish so well. Thank you for that. And she said his face just lit up. He almost glowed to get that specific recognition of the effort he was putting in. That's an example of somebody else. Let me give you an example of one that I did. There's a particular local parish that I go to that, bottom line, their schedule fits my work schedule so that I can get to daily masses more often than, just the weekend masses and that kind of stuff. And I don't get there every day, not even close to it. Sometimes I'm lucky if I'll make, one extra mass a week. But I had been going for a while, and I had noticed this one particular priest, they have confession before each mass, or almost each mass, certainly the weekdays, and I think most of the weekend masses. And I noticed a few times, not once, not twice, but at least 3 separate times, I noticed the lines had been so long that they had to cut off the confession so that they could have mass. And of course, people were disappointed that they didn't get to go to confession. And at the appropriate time during the mass, he stopped and made a comment. I don't remember exactly when he did it. I think it might have been the final blessing or something like that, so that it didn't disrupt the liturgy. But he stopped and he made the comment. By the way, those of you who were waiting in line for confession and didn't get a chance to go, as soon as the mass is over and I get a chance to disrobe, I'll be going back to the confessional. You can get back in line and I'll stay as long as it takes to hear all of you. Again, not once, not twice, at least 3 times I caught him doing that. And I thought that was fantastic. And if I had the chance, I would have stopped after Mass, shook his hand and said, hey, Father, that's great what you're doing. But of course, he's ducking right into the confessional, so that's not an option. But wouldn't you know it, a time comes up a little bit after this where I wanted to go to confession. And I did have time to get in, and there wasn't a long line behind me. And so when I was finished the confession, by the way, it was obviously the same priest. And also, by the way, I'm not saying the other priests of this parish wouldn't do this. For all I know, they do this as well. But he was the one that I noticed commenting about it and doing it. So anyway, I finished my confession. I got the absolution. And as I was done, I says, Father, if you don't mind, I want to take just a minute before I leave the confessional just to tell you something. He says, what's on your mind? And I told him what I'd noticed. And I said, Father, I just want you to know how much I appreciate and admire the effort you're putting into shepherding your flock by taking that extra time, by coming those extra minutes when you don't really have to, but you obviously care about your parishioners. Now, I like to do the anonymous confession behind the screen, so I can't tell you what his face looked like. I guess in theory he could have been annoyed with me saying that, but I like to think he wasn't, and that hopefully that I made his day. Notice specifics, comment on specifics, compliment them on specifics. That'll go a long way. So I guess I beat the drum long enough on compliments. What else can you do? Any of the obvious stuff. Christmas gifts, Easter gifts. Those are great. There is nothing wrong with those things. Let me mention one other little thing. Most of you probably have one parish that you stick with all the time. And if you got a parish that's good enough that works for you, that's great. That's wonderful. I don't want to stop you. But in the nature of what I'm doing, I kind of travel around and meet a bunch of them. And if you happen to notice a parish with a good priest and a good liturgy, but that it's sparsely attended, you might make a point of going there more often. That parish I was just telling you about, even on the weekday masses, they probably have at least 50 people there. There's other parishes with a good, strong liturgy and a good, strong pastor, but they're just so far out in the boonies, there might be 8 people at Mass. Maybe make a point of going there sometimes, just to buck up the attendance and to let them know, hey, I appreciate what you're doing. Even if you don't stop and say anything after Mass, and if you do, that'd be great too. But sometimes just that presence, just that, hey, your liturgy is good enough for me to drive out of the way and attend this sparsely attended Mass because I appreciate what you're doing. That's another way to kind of show your appreciation for them. So those are a few of the specifics, specific ideas about how we can encourage our clergy and that kind of stuff. I'm already running over 20 minutes, and the last one of these that I did was under 10, so I probably need to cut it off here. But I do want to make one last comment or concept as I promised at the beginning, which is the idea of I want to start a conversation here. Go down in the comments, also talk to your friends, talk to you whatever. There's a concept that comes from things like crowdsourcing and that kind of stuff, and I don't know the exact quote, but essentially I'm going to paraphrase, and it essentially says something to the effect of, nobody knows everything, but everybody knows something. Based upon that concept, if we work together, we can figure out much more than any of us are going to figure out alone. So I want to invite you to really think about this and then get into the comments section and talk about how we can encourage our priests and bishops. Talk to your friends, talk to each other, talk to me. By the way, if you come up with good enough ideas and then make them into the comments, they might also make it into a follow-up video. Let's work with each other to figure out how we can build up and fix the church by encouraging our priests and bishops and clerics and so on. Let's discuss our ideas together. Let's build each other up in building our clergy up to build our church up, all for the greater glory and honor of God. With that being said, this is much longer than I had hoped to run, so I'm going to break here, and I'm going to say good day, good luck, and God bless you. Bye-bye now.